Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Player 2 podcast. I'm your co-host, Rade Stojsavlovich.
And I'm your co-host, Dave Leary. It is lovely to be back with you again, Roddy.
Likewise. It's nice, a sunny day when we're recording it here in wonderful Seattle, Washington. So that's always nice. I got to walk the dog and get my dose of sunshine.
Very good. The rare sunshine case up in Seattle, huh?
Yeah, it is. I mean, sometimes we get a winter break, but it's sort of nice. All right. So got a bunch of stuff going on in today's episode. We're going to talk a little bit about VR, but let's first start with some of the broader news in the industry. You got some interesting data about holiday game performance on Steam you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is kind of a small thing, but surprised me. I think the game industry website had an article about this. The second best-selling game over the holiday period on Steam in terms of the number of units moved after Arc Raiders was actually an old narrative title called Detroit Beyond Human, which apparently was on sale for something like 90% off. In terms of the total amount of revenue, it's not that large, but the fact that it sold the second most number of units after Arc Raiders really kind of reinforces a theme I think you've brought up before, Roddy, which is the sales pressure is what drives numbers on Steam pretty aggressively.
Yeah. So Detroit Become Human it's a great game. I remember playing it when it came out, I think way back in 2018. And so, yeah, sales get the attention on Steam. It's my biggest complaint about the platform is just the continual pressure to get featured by discounting. It's like the most consistent way that it's done it, and it devalues content. Now, this particular case is really interesting, and I think it's worth talking about. I think this is a great game. It's an older game. I don't expect an older game that's 7 years old, despite being a great game, to sell for full retail price. I just don't think that's realistic. So, like, discounting that is fine. Like, makes total sense. Like, that's common retail practice. I think it just illustrates the challenge that if you're launching a new game, you're not competing just with new games. You're competing against this entire back catalog. And if something like this comes out, that's great and is on a 90% discount or whatever percentage it worked out to be, like, you have to deal with that and you have to get your new game attention. And so, like, I've seen it time and time again, like, holidays are a great time for games to sell and make money. It is a terrible time to launch a new game. And like, I tell this to less experienced developers all the time. Don't launch your brand new game in the holiday. It's so crowded. It's really, really hard to stand out. And I think this is just a good example of that.
Yeah, I think that's dead on. And, that's an interesting flip from the ages, 10, 15 years ago, when you and I know back in that day would probably think very carefully about how can we hit that holiday window. You'd work really hard to sometimes get a game out right around the holidays just so you could hit that big window when everyone was buying whatever the games were that came out this year. But there is such a backlog now of great stuff available for cheap that, you have to think about the whole year window, I think.
Yeah, and it's going to vary too by genre. And the problem for indie devs in particular is this data is not easy to come by. You have to go back and talk to other studio heads. You have to look at what is publicly available, which frankly is just not a lot. And kind of, it's not quite reading the tea leaves, but you really do have to figure out, like, all right, is it a good time now to release this narrative heavy RPG versus this shooter versus this action-packed episodic game? It just really starts to matter more than ever. And so just something we have to pay attention to.
And you got to factor in the blast radius still, right? I mean, you and I have been talking about how people are going to be avoiding the GTA 6 window later this year. There's just a lot of factors to consider now, and it's a increasingly complicated decision about when to launch your game to get the best surfacing and get the best attention on it.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, before we recorded this, I mentioned I had a surprise that I was going to unveil during the podcast.
I like surprises. Surprise me.
It is. So we talked about the other game that did really well that you and I are still gushing over, and that's Arc Raiders. And so I decided to bring that into the physical realm, and I've got my Arc Raiders shirt that I'm wearing today for the podcast. That's an
excellent shirt. And I also don't believe that you're friendly because I've played Arc Raiders.
For those of you that aren't watching, I'm wearing a shirt that has the Arc Raiders logo and it says friendly on it. It's
don't Don't
Yeah,
believe his lies, everyone. Don't
hey,
believe it.
you
He's
did
going to
learn a
shoot you
little
at the
bit.
extract. I guarantee it.
So I don't. I did shoot somebody the other day with a friend of mine. It was the first time in a while. We went in and said we were going after a bastion. And if they're already there and are going to do it, just say so and we'll get out of the way. And we asked them multiple times and they just said nothing back. And we're like, all right, this is suspicious. So we thought they were going to turn on us. So we got the drop on them and shot them. And sure enough, they had loaded up and gave me a very handy hull buster to take that thing out. And we did it and got out of there.
You have been far more friendly. You're far more friendly lately than I have been in that game.
Well, like now I have a shirt to prove it. So
that's true.
There you go.
True.
All right. Let's finish up the news while I take this thing off because it's warm here and I'm roasting. Meta laid off a whole bunch of people in the VR division. A lot of friends and colleagues that I've worked with and studios that I led the acquisition on and I managed. And it sucks to see it. I knew it was coming. A lot of people kind of Meta announced they were going to be cutting a bit in Reality Labs. I figured where it was going to come from. So, I mean, I hope, and a lot of people weren't taken by surprise, but I know many were. And it just sucks. This just happened yesterday. They're still processing this.
I imagine this is near and dear to your heart, right? I mean, you must know a lot of people who lost their jobs yesterday because of your experience there.
Yeah, I had direct reports that lost their job, people that I personally hired, studios that I personally acquired and I stood up in front of and managed, and friends that I've known for a very long time that were there. Some that had just come up in the industry there and have moved on to positions. And you know, it's just painful to see, especially in this environment. Like any other time, I would say, all right, this sucks, but they're going to bounce back pretty quickly. Now, man, it's brutal.
Yeah, boy, are you as sick of talking about layoffs as I am? I actually wonder if we ought to quit talking about it on the podcast so much. I mean, we need to bring it up. We need to surface it. We need to talk about it. But boy, it gets hard. Right?
It is tough. And so what I'd like to do is something a little bit different and not focus on the layoffs themselves, because I don't think us lamenting this is helping anybody out. I think it would be helpful to talk a little bit about where we are and what we could do, something that might give people some agency, might help them out with just coming to grips with why something happened and how they might want to move forward. And I thought, since this one was a big VR industry layoff, we talk about what went wrong with VR, or how did we get here with VR? Why hasn't it taken off like it was predicted to?
I think that's an excellent topic. I will confess out of the gate that you're going to be far more of an expert on this topic than I am. I have a few opinions and thoughts. My involvement with VR has been very light. It was at Playful when Playful worked on Lucky's Tale, which was a launch title on Oculus VR. So I was kind of there in the early going, and I was their test guinea pig for making whether or not the game would make you nauseated, because pretty much the first time I put on a VR headset, I was immediately nauseated, and that continues to be true to this day. I did not actually work directly on the game, so my experience is very, very limited in the VR space. So I'm looking to you to educate me on this topic.
Yeah, I'll do my best on that. So I joined the Oculus division in 2016, shortly after the acquisition by Meta of Oculus. I think I was like the 370th employee in the Oculus division. And when I left, it was like 15,000. It had just launched. In fact, the gentleman that hired me was Jason Rubin, who led the content team there. He also was the co-founder of Naughty Dog from the PlayStation days. And we talked and came on board, and he said, hey, we're launching the Rift. Can we move your start date back a couple weeks? And I said, yeah, of course. So I came on just as Rift was launching in the middle of the hardware chaos, and I watched this scrappy little company kind of deal with that and scale up. Lucky's Tale was the pack-in title that came with that. And I was specifically brought in because they needed somebody on the content team, which at that time was, I think, in totality, publishing and didn't even have first-party studios there, but like the whole publishing group was about a dozen people. They were looking for somebody to focus on funding mobile-first VR titles. And so Oculus at that time had two devices. They had just launched the Rift, which was the high-end PC-attached VR headset. And this partnership they did with Samsung called the Gear VR, where you took a Samsung phone and you put it in this piece of plastic with this these lenses and put that on your head. And they were like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, that's going to be where VR goes. Cheaper, easier to access. That's going to get the most users. And people were like, well, okay, if you say so. And you got to remember, this thing was clunky at the time. It was what we would call 3 degree of freedom versus 6 degree of freedom. So if you think of a camera on a tripod that can look around in any direction, that was Gear VR. You couldn't move left and right and stick your head behind something because it just didn't have that extra freedom of movement. Unlike the Rift, which you could move your head around things, and it was a lot different. With Gear VR, if you wanted to move your perspective in the scene, we had to translate the camera in the game engine. And so I worked on that. It had a bunch of issues, got a lot of adoption. I built in partnership with the AAA team, one of the most popular titles. It was a jump scare game called Face Your Fears. Did really, really well there. I think we got something like 90% of Gear VR users were using that thing, which was nuts. And then as that thing progressed, we realized that it was never going to really move the needle for people. It was kind of a toy, a gimmick. It just wasn't that compelling. And there was a team working on this device there that eventually became Quest. And the sales pitch to me on that one was, hey, we're going to make the Rift as easy to use as putting a hat on. I was like, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. I don't have these cameras I have to set up and deal with. Or if you were using the Valve headset, I don't have these lighthouses that I have to stick up on my wall and maybe drill a hole in there. I'm like, well, if I could get that same type of freedom of motion VR experience without all that hassle, that'd be pretty cool. That's going to be big. So I joined on that as the product manager for content. So I represented game developers and content developers in general in partnership with the hardware people, the marketing launch people. And there was kind of a small group of us that were sort of steering this thing. And it launched, and it outsold in a little over a month lifetime sales of PC VR. And now you start breaking it down into what people were saying. The VR purists were like, well, it looks like crap because it's a mobile chip in there, and fidelity is what matters, and high-end VR is the only thing. And like, yeah, okay, whatever. You could hold on to that belief, but just the data just doesn't bear that out. And there's still people, by the way, to this day that say VR will take off when you can get the fidelity of a AAA game on a headset. I don't buy it. There's just no data to back that up. So it did really well. We built out a first-party studio group. We started by buying the developer of Beat Saber, Beat Games, and then bought 9 other studios over the course of a couple of years. And I managed that group, building that content. And so when the layoffs happened, 3 of the studios that I work closely with, Twisted Pixel, Armature, and Sanzaru, are gone. And Sanzaru, I had history going back to with from my days at Sony as well, when I worked on PlayStation. And so it was doing well for a while. And especially during the pandemic, we were seeing significant growth. We were thinking this was going to be an industry. All the while, Meta was pouring a lot of money into R&D to make better headsets, faster, better looking, lighter, smaller, more comfortable. And you see that evolution going from the old Quest to what's out there today. And they were also pouring a lot of money into content, not just fully funded products. Like we tried some AAA stuff. There was a partnership with Ubisoft. They did games like Deadpool, Batman Arkham. They were also funding independent developers with original titles. A whole bunch of money on that. Then the cost of goods became significant and the price of the headset went up. And as soon as it reached sort of past that magical $300 mass market price point that we've seen for consoles, we watched sales go down. And it still was growing, but it just wasn't growing at the rate that it was before. And then it kind of tapered off. And it doesn't have great retention of users. A lot of people try it, use it for a while, and don't stick with it. And that's generally not a good thing. And there's a lot of reasons why. And I think that's ultimately what has been holding back VR from going mainstream. Like I'll kind of just list a bunch of things. It's not going to be any one of those. It's going to be a combination of those, and it's going to depend on the person. First off, and this is a big one, not to be underestimated, especially by VR fans who are kind of immune to this, there's a physical discomfort issue. A lot of people get nauseous
Though
with
I
the
believe
headsets.
that has gotten better, right? I have not used the latest and greatest tech, but I think it's not quite like the old days when I was regularly sick every time I put a Rift on my head. It things got better with that over the years. The frame rate got better, which of course is a large part of that nausea-inducing effect. Was that your experience?
So there's a lot of tricks on what you can do to reduce it. The frame rate's a big one, and we run like VR stuff runs at a high frame rate, so like that hasn't really been that much of an issue. And pushing it past where it is now doesn't really change that. There's some cool techniques in there so that you don't drop frames, because if you get hitches in a rendered scene, that really makes you uncomfortable. More than any of that, we just got really good as developers figuring out how to move a camera from point A to point B without making people instantly sick. And if you looked at some of those original titles, like you put it on, you'd be like, oh God, I feel really queasy. It's terrible. But even with all that, there's a good number of people that just physically get discomfort when they play anything on the headset. Yeah, and you're one of them. And the problem is the more you use VR, the more you become immune to that. It got to the point where we were evaluating a bunch of stuff coming in, and one of the engineers from the developer relations team says, hey, you got to see this. And it was some dude built this theme park simulator type of thing. And if you remember those rides that kind of whip you around like on a boat or something, he did that in VR, and then it flung you in the air, and it made all of us like ill. And except one guy who, I don't know if you remember Eric from the Westwood days. Apparently he grew up on a commercial fishing boat with his father. He didn't get sick. I think it's physically impossible to make him get sick. But the rest of us were doing all the tricks like close one eye so you're not doing stereoscopic vision. And it became an internal challenge to see how long you could keep the headset on before you just threw it down and ran away looking for a bucket. For some people, that never goes away. So
certainly
that's
some of the
one.
most, I feel like some of the most successful VR titles I've played, or at least the ones that worked best for me, were things like a horror game where you just sit on the couch and scary stuff happens around you and you're not actually moving. You're just looking at different things or turning your head rather than a roller coaster motion that flips you upside down.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you look at a game like Beat Saber, like it is that. Nobody complains about that. Interestingly, you look at another top game like Gorilla Tag that does have locomotion. They did it by kind of mimicking movement of an ape, using your arms to propel you, and that physical connection makes it way more comfortable for most people. Obviously, you can't do that in everything. Like, you imagine if you're doing a meeting app and you're running around like an ape in there, you kind of lose credibility. So physical discomfort was one thing. There's a group of developers and internal people at Meta who were always going on about like, well, you just need the killer app. And this was the idea that there's one app that we just have to find that's going to make it so obvious that VR is a great device to use for something that it'll just open the floodgates to sales. There's no killer app. I don't think there ever will be. I don't know. I mean, you've heard that theory of a killer app on a lot of platforms.
Yeah, that's not a new theory. That's every time there's a new tech, I think people are looking for that killer app, and it's often misguided.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to those old stories about like the PC. Like the PC took off because of VisiCalc, the precursor spreadsheet to all the spreadsheets. And yeah, okay, maybe if you're selling 10,000 of these very expensive devices to accountants and business people, that is a killer app. That's not how mass market works.
And I mean, this is kind of a weird aside, but I mean, we probably need to acknowledge that adult entertainment, which drove videotapes and some new tech like Laserdiscs, is also one of the remaining popular standbys on VR, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Fun story about that. There was, we could broadly tell on the system apps when I was there about like, what are the most popular apps, right? You could look at this in the store. And there was one of them that kept popping up pretty high, and it was browser. And they're like, wow, the average people using browser are doing it twice a day in these 15-minute or 20-minute chunks. And there's this product manager in there, really, really smart individual, just a little bit naive. And he's like, yeah, we don't know what they're browsing. I'm like, yeah, they're browsing porn. And he's like, you don't know that? I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you do. So, you go in there and he's like, well, there's this other video that's really popular that people are watching, and that's not porn. I'm like, really? Have you watched it? And so I pulled it up in this conference room with a bunch of senior leaders and everything, and it was hiking in this kind of like this desert thing outside of Los Angeles or something like that. He's like, see, that's not porn. I'm like, well, hold on a minute. And you're following this young, attractive woman who's wearing very tight yoga clothes, and halfway up the hike, she, for no reason apparently, decides to remove her jacket and stretch. And I'm like, and there it is. So yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the next common refrain about why hasn't it taken off is like, well, it's uncomfortable, it's too heavy. And I buy it. Yeah, to some people that's probably a thing, but I think there's something else in there. You have to put something on your face. So if you're wearing glasses, despite the fact that there are some accommodations for that, not everyone's glasses are going to fit in that thing. And if they do, it might not be comfortable. And if it is, it might not look great to you. If you're wearing makeup, it's going to smudge it. If you've got really fancy hair, which neither one of us do, it's going to mess it up. And like, that is a legit consideration. But to me, the biggest issue is it's hard to use. It's not like a phone that everybody's got it, they pick it up and they're doing something in their phone in seconds. It's just not like that with VR. It's not even like that with the PC. And I think that ultimately explains why it's a lot of Gen Z, Gen Alpha users on it. They tend to be the kind of people that maybe a parent bought the device, they're not using it, their kid picked it up. Now they could do something where their parents aren't watching them all the time. Maybe they just wanted a big screen experience, but they're also, we know those customers are willing to put up with stuff, some friction, whereas you and I just aren't as older users.
Yeah, I mean, friction is the killer of so many games. Excessive difficulty in getting into something. One of the reasons I think Arc Raider works so much better than Tarkov is that you're 10 seconds to get into a match instead of 5 minutes. Any time you have to spend setting up a VR rig is time you're not in playing a game. I mean, that in theory got better over time. It sounds like that was one of the problems Meta was trying to solve with the glasses, right?
It did, but there were long load times, there were patches, you had to make sure it charged. It was one of the things that his last year there, John Carmack of id Software and Doom fame, who was one of the early Oculus people, was championing. He says, you would be better off as engineers to shave half a second off of a load time than put in another feature. That was a pretty hot debate internally. And I happen to think he was right. Like, we know in games, for example, if your matchmaking time is too long, people quit out. It gets even worse on mobile. There's just no attention span for something like that. You've got a couple seconds. And we used to always measure when I was working on a lot of games. You've probably heard of the time to fun metric. The longer that is, the worse your game performs.
So is there going to be a comeback? Will VR come back at some point when the tech gets cheaper and easier and smaller again?
No, I don't think so. So there was a debate I was having with somebody about Valve's new Steam Frame VR headset that they're releasing. And my take on it was like, this is going to be too expensive to move the needle. He's like, well, you don't know how Valve's going to price it. I'm like, well, I don't. But I know they're putting a lot of expensive kit in there, so that's not cheap. And I know they don't subsidize hardware. So yeah, I don't think that's going to work. I also know they're not funding development. And I think this is why this kind of comes down to the core of why I don't think VR gaming goes big. For the past several years, the development community has basically been dependent on subsidies for their content development. Now, not every dev is like that, but there's no external funding from any of the big publishers. Venture capital for games is dried up. There just really isn't any appreciable funding happening there. And it's been like that in VR for even longer. And with Meta not putting in money and nobody else putting in money, I just don't see how there's a business.
Seems like there's been a lot of technologies over the years that have drawn the attention of investors to the detriment of those of us that want to just make great games that engage people. I mean, I think about VR and then AR to some extent, and then NFTs and Web3, and arguably AI, though I think you and I see that there's some substantive uses for that actually do make games better. This is a frustrating story for me, Rade. I'm not going to lie that VR money was pouring into VR for so long and now it's just kind of dying.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can imagine what it feels like to me. Like, I
Yeah.
spent a good chunk of my career helping to build that and bringing a lot of people along on that journey, and to see them, kind of come to their end of the road in VR like this is just sad. I haven't told a lot of people this, but I had a couple things that I was looking at doing before I joined Meta. And I joined because I thought I was a true believer in VR. I was going to go there, spend a couple years at first party, become an expert in VR, and then leave, easily get some external funding, start my own studio, and then flip it to a big publisher pretty quickly. Because, I'd be an expert in VR. I would bring on some expert developers with me. I could get money. I could get a product out there because I knew what would work. And that obviously didn't happen. And I'm not so sad about that. I'm kind of just sad that I do think there's some potential in there, but I'm not even mad that Meta is not doing VR. I mean, sure, there were missteps along the way, and things I would have liked to see happen differently, and they didn't. But I totally get why they're focusing their attention on wearables and AR. In fact, internally, they were pretty clear with everybody there that VR was the thing until AR really took off. I don't know when AR becomes the thing, or if it ever becomes the thing that we expect from science fiction, where you and I are wearing the glasses that we're wearing right now, and we've got AI-driven augmented reality putting stuff on top of us. I could go walk into a conference and it's got people's names above their head because I'm sort of name blind that way. I don't know if we're ever going to get that. It might be like Fusion, where it's 10 years out for the past 30 years. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. But I do know that folks working on it are very, very smart. And the problem is just extremely difficult. We're talking about physics level issues. Like, how do you bend light? Like, that's not an easy problem to solve.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, this is a good cautionary tale for future tech that seems exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think the worst takeaway that anyone could have from this is to not jump in when there's something like this that excites you, because it just as easily could have gone the other way and been this huge transformative thing. I want to be really clear. I'm not saying VR is dead. I just don't think it's going to be huge. I think there's a lot of very special use cases of it that are going to continue to be very important. I know there was some amazing stuff that I saw in medical imaging that where surgeons were modeling a brain for a tumor surgery and could walk around and plan their approach to minimize negative effects on a patient. Like, that's pretty cool. I think there's some interesting things to happen still in gaming. I just think we're going to have to be very careful as an industry of what we approach and what we do. I still think to this day, if you remember Super Hot, that game from back in the day, they did a VR version of it. It was better in VR than any other platform I ever played that game.
I completely can see that. And I haven't done it myself yet, but I've watched a fair few videos of Skyrim in VR too, which I imagine would at least be fun as a momentary diversion, if nothing else. I totally think there are games that would be interesting in VR, no question.
So I think it continues. It'll find a new equilibrium this year. There may be other entrants. I know Valve is still playing around with it a little bit. There may be some others as well in there, but I think it's going to be a and device rather than a replacement device. It'll be gaming on consoles and PC and phones and VR, and one is not going to displace any of the others. And we saw this, look, people were predicting when mobile came out, consoles are dead, mobile's going to kill everything. Yeah, that didn't happen. So I'm not keen on being one of those, this is dead sort of people. It just doesn't pan out that way.
I appreciate your nuanced prediction here.
Yeah. So I think there's still some pretty cool stuff that's going to be coming out, and we'll see what that content looks like. At least one more device coming out from Valve. Meta said they've got one more. They haven't said anything else differently, and I don't have any info that says otherwise. And again, even if I did, I wouldn't share that because that would be confidential. So yeah, just pay attention to the space. All right. Let's talk about games that we're playing, because you have one you wanted to bring up.
Well, and I will keep this brief because I will guarantee you have not played this game and you probably won't. So I'm going to surprise you this week. Is that okay?
Well, I surprised you with this awesome shirt. I think it's fair for you to do the same.
You did. It was not only a surprising shirt, but a misleading shirt. So I will surprise you with this as well. You know, from having known me for a long time, that I've spent a lot of time thinking about and analyzing narrative in games. It's kind of my special place. For me, memorable narrative games are not the ones with the best writing or necessarily even the best story, but they're ones where the narrative and the gameplay kind of intertwine. And I think about things like Disco Elysium, which we could do a whole episode on. I think about Pentiment, which was Josh Sawyer's pet project at Obsidian. That's pretty nifty take on a Name of the Rose style murder mystery. And then I think about one of my favorite games, which not a lot of people know about or have played, but is Pathologic 2. I don't know if you're familiar with Pathologic 2 at all.
I am not. I didn't even know there was a Pathologic 1. So
there was a Pathologic 1, and I can briefly talk about that. And here's the funny thing. Pathologic 3 just stealth launched on Steam. These are games made by a small Russian developer, Ice Pick Lodge. They are sort of a horror-themed first-person. At least Pathologic 2 leans more into the survival aspects, traditional food and water meters. You are struggling to solve a plague in a town, and the town has all kinds of weird stuff going on. But Pathologic 2 and 3 pull off a couple of nifty narrative tricks, and I just kind of wanted to mention them here. They actually are parallel stories. In both cases, you are playing a medical professional of some sort who arrives at this town and has 12 days to solve the plague. So there is both a time pressure and other game pressures like hunger and thirst in Pathologic 2. The trick that Pathologic 3 pulls is they ditched all of the survival stuff from Pathologic 2, and your character is now a snarky, manic depressive guy who is also a drug addict, but is a genius doctor. And so he spends a bunch of time managing, instead of hunger and thirst, his mood. And he does this by running around town and kicking trash cans to make himself more manic. That's the simplistic version. But it's also interwoven with the dialogue trees. So the effect of this is really interesting because you might be having a conversation with somebody and it makes you so apathetic that at the end of the conversation, you're like, I can't live anymore. And you pull out your gun and shoot yourself. So that's a real interesting way to do a character. Interesting way to do a narrative for sure. They also kind of changed the genre of the game. Pathologic 2 was more open world survival. Pathologic 3 is more of a time loop game where your character is so insane that he actually resets the day and tries to do it over again on the regular. And again, as I mentioned, they are telling a parallel story that's exactly the same, just from different perspectives of two characters in the world. I do not think this is a series for everyone, so I will caveat it with that. It leans heavily on time management. It's punishingly difficult. It's like a magical realist Russian literature novel with 100 characters. But in terms of creativity with the narrative, it's up there for me with Disco Elysium and Pentiment and some other games that I really respect. It's the kind of thing that I don't think I would have been ever smart enough to quite pull off. It kind of came out of nowhere for me, but when I completed Pathologic 2, I certainly felt like I had been through something. And those types of emotions are something that games can do in a way that a lot of linear narratives like books and movies just can't.
That's all right. You're right. I haven't played that. I want to check it out now. There's absolutely some of the stuff like that that I find is transformative. Tying back my experiences with VR is we saw an early experiment with where somebody played in VR a female character in a public space, and they were getting catcalled and a bunch of other stuff. And now this was just going around. I saw it on LinkedIn. A research group in Italy just did it and repeated the same thing. But like this happened years ago in VR. And like the ability to get into a character's head through a game is just something that's just completely unique to that medium. It's not the same when you're reading a book. It's not the same when you're watching a movie. Like you kind of have that kind of connection in a game. And so, yeah, that's interesting.
Have you done Disco Elysium? We could do a whole episode just talking about Disco Elysium, I think. What did you think of it? Did you enjoy it? Because not everyone does, but it's one of my favorites.
So it was one of those games where I wanted to love it as a gamer, but I started getting into it as a developer, and I couldn't shake that lens. And it just like I'm looking at mechanics, I'm like, okay, I really appreciate what they did there. And so it took away some of my pure enjoyment or sense of wonder as a gamer. And that's okay. That happens more often than not. They just did a really good job.
Yeah, lots to unpack there, and a bold game too. Pathologic 2 is even more wacky, and Pathologic 3 is equally wacky. So I definitely encourage you to check it out, but I'm not going to be surprised if you come away from it saying you hated it, because a lot of people do. So,
and that's okay.
That's my game of the week for you.
All right. Love it. Hey, thanks everybody for joining us this week. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Helps it out.
It's right
helps
down
us
there
out.
somewhere.
Yep. And share the podcast with your friends. Let them know what's going on.
We are also we're on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, right? Are we anywhere else? Is that it? I think that's it.
Yeah, because we're kind of lazy, and that's what the podcast editing tool does. But that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right. Well, see you all again next week.
Later.